For the last few months, we've been working directly with SOM and the Cornell users. And as Colin and his teams works from the master plan level in terms of the adjacency of buildings, the openscape and the landscaping, we've been working sort of from below and up, which means working with the client, with the end user, and figuring out really on the programming side what's inside the building and what's not inside the building. What's part of the classrooms, what's part of collab space, open spaces, relationship to how you enter the building, relationship to the siding, and so on and so forth. So there are a few sort of key points here that I can touch on. Kathy mentioned before about the innovative academic environment, and if I go back a little bit to the challenge for us to really design a space which doesn't have, let's say, a department. There isn't a space where you go where it's a part of an English department or a math department. It's much more sort of open and sort of hub-like, and those hubs again can also change. So flexibility becomes a key issue when we're designing our spaces. The design process is currently underway. We just finished delivering what they call the pre-schematic phase, which is essentially the tally of figuring out again what goes inside the building. So as we get into the schematic design, we'll get the definition of what's the final program, as well as the final adjacencies throughout the four corners of the building. Classroom and collaborative spaces. Because this is a grad level campus, the utilization of classrooms is much lower than if this were undergrad. In other words, as opposed to the more traditional teaching of courses where it's a faculty, classroom, students, this is a much more sort of research-based academic institution, so the work and the studying happens more in cluster and not necessarily in the traditional classroom setting. So it's incredibly important for us to really balance the sort of traditional classroom space with other types of spaces which is more appropriate for the engagement, for the casual engagement, because these days with more grad level researcher, it's not so much about the classroom, it's more about where is the coffee, and can we go to the Starbucks, and can we spread out and work on a laptop. So those are the parts of the collaboration and social spaces that we're trying to figure out. Then finally, the ambition for net zero. We're working with Arab, who's our engineers, on several different features of how to get to net zero. Incredibly ambitious goals. The requirement to get to net zero is going to be a combination of many different things and a lot of little things. So as Andrew was mentioning before, the geothermal wells, there's a lot of things that happens on areas where you ultimately don't even see on the mechanical side, which are tied in a basement in the dark somewhere. But probably the most expressive one, as Kathy was mentioning, was the PV, the solar cell. And what's interesting for us is we were looking for ways to have a building which is fully integrated with the net zero ambition and how to articulate and how to deal with this PV problem. The photovoltaics is usually a challenge in an urban city because it requires a lot of space. And of course, the urban context spaces of the premium. So the idea of taking this PV and elevating it above the buildings and creating a canopy which creates sort of a third space, and it's part of the public outdoor space, was something that was very interesting for us. So that's how we're tackling some of these ambitions for net zero. A few renderings of where we are today. If you can imagine going back to Colin's phase 1 and phase 2, you're about at the very end of phase 1, so phase 2 would be in theory behind you on this shot. You're looking at first academic building, the large social space, and then the entry to the campus beyond. I think the key thing to look at here is the relationship between the landscape, the open area, the central plaza, which is open to New York beyond, and the interface between the programming that's at the ground level of our first academic building. There's a lot of sort of going back and forth in trying to create a ground level program, what is in our building and accessible to the public that can really help activate this sort of public atmosphere. So areas such as this, we're looking at cafes. We're looking at areas of an atrium. We're looking at areas with tables where people can casually sit down and have a conversation, and have them in areas where you can actually access them publicly, so that the security becomes beyond that point. So it's a shared space with the public.
And I think that's
that's it. So
yeah. Let me introduce Melanie Myers, who will talk